Welcome to the Science of Kindness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Culver, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us today. We share real stories and give you tips, tricks, and strategies to fit kindness into your life. Enjoy and know that you are a bright light in this world. Welcome back to the Science of Kindness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Culver, and today we're talking about kindness isn't nice. And that's the point. I was listening to a conversation between Simon Sinek and Trevor Noah, and Trevor said something that feels simple on the surface, but disruptive when you really think about it. And it really was the spark that triggered the conversation for this show. He said, kindness is not niceness. And the more I sat with that thought, and the more I sat with that comment, I realized how confusion, how burnout, how resentment, how silence, they exist in our homes, really in our schools, our workplaces, our communities, but we mix those two words up so much. I remember whenever I was an executive leader, I was working with a leadership team that was a dysfunctional, disarrayed mess. It was a hot mess. The leader of the team was super nice, but not kind. Let me give you an example. This team was fueled by chaos. She believed the leader created all the chaos. When members of this team would come, now mind you, the leadership team was made up of different department leaders, different services leaders, and so it was a very unique and broad team meeting. When those individuals would come to this executive leader or this team leader as the decision maker, she said yes to everyone. So if you wanted it, she said yes, right? So mind you, everyone's being told yes by the leader, and they're all working in their own silos of creating these things or saying yes. And when there is roadblocks and there are dead ends, people begin to get frustrated and begin to have resentment. And so this leader would then welcome in these team members to talk to her. And when they were voicing frustrations about their colleagues, she would jump in. She would begin to voice frustrations about the colleagues as well. So behind closed doors, she's talking about everyone. The team's talking about everyone. Everyone's being told yes. So friends, you can only imagine. This team meeting is toxic. It's full of contradictions and it's full of confrontations. And what I realized is in that moment, when we are having those experiences that are super toxic, that are super heavy, our brain reads all of this conflict as a threat. And so you've heard me talk about before the fight or flight response. Our brain is in fight or flight. And like I've said 100 times, my natural response is kerosene. We're going to burn it down, right? That is not a natural response. So this leader was unable to recognize some of these key moments and key attributes in these meetings and not seeing that there was all this confrontation and conflict. And so what she decided to do was avoid it, to act like there was not an elephant in the room. Well, friends, guess what? That is a nervous system response. Because you don't know what to do, your nervous system is responding. And so you think silence is the solution, but in reality, silence feels safe only short term. Because what's happened now is there's long-term damage to trust and to safety because these individuals have created stories in their mind without clarity. If you've been to one of my workshops, I have an activity that comes from Joshua Stamper and Charlie Peck in their book, The Language of Behavior, which is an incredible book. If you're looking for it, check it out on Amazon.com, The Language of Behavior, Joshua Stamper, Charlie Peck. And there's an activity they have in their book that has F__K. And when you put that up visually on the screen, people begin to think they're using profanity in the workshop. But in reality, we're saying fork, right? What I'm trying to show is that's a metaphor for our minds. When we don't have all the information, we fill it in with negativity. We fill it in with what we do have. And so because as individuals, none of this had been confronted, none of this had been taken care of, there was lots of stories in their mind and people were grasping for control. We grasp for control because it's the one thing that makes us feel safe. When we don't have control, we feel unsafe. And it's not because we don't care, right? It's because we're trying to look for some sort of safety, some sort of thing. And what I had to remind myself as I unpack this story, even in this conversation, is it's not that this leader didn't care. This leader thought what they were doing was working. Because we are wired to avoid discomfort. But what happened was create chaos and dysfunction. And I think this leads to the next point that Trevor Noah made in his conversation related in this video. Trevor described niceness as the part of kindness that doesn't require action, right? He says in the video that niceness is smiling. Niceness is nodding. Niceness is avoiding conflict. Niceness is keeping the peace on the surface. And I agree with him in some extent. I also would push here and say that some of those aspects of nodding and smiling are foundational components of confetti kindness, which what Houston Kraft calls as super surface level kindness. That we're looking for deep kindness as we walk this journey of life, and that's seeking to understand, asking questions, assuming positive intent, walking with empathy, giving grace, walking with joy, choosing happiness, choosing kindness. And what I think Trevor Noah is trying to explain to us is kindness moves, kindness intervenes, kindness risks that discomfort. And I think to even make it more simplistic, we can define niceness as comfort, right? Niceness as protecting feelings, where kindness is protecting dignity and really protecting people. And I think it makes more sense when we look at clear examples. And one of the ones that stands out to me is niceness asks literally, how do I avoid making this awkward, right? I was in a meeting one time where I really struggled speaking honestly, openly, vulnerably about an experience that had happened, and I needed to explain me. I needed to explain me in that space. And so I named exactly that. This is awkward for me. This is what I need to say, right? And that's really hard because our heart starts to pound, we start to flutter, and it made sense to me. It was another fight or flight moment. I felt unsafe. I was in that moment of discomfort. I was risking that discomfort, but I needed to protect dignity and I needed to protect people. So when you ask the question from niceness, which was, how do I avoid making this awkward, into the kind space of what does this person need to grow, heal, or to be protected, it gave me the courage to speak, right? It gave me the courage to speak. Because we all can carry invisible backpacks, and we don't walk around with signs on our backs or on our chests that say, I'm exhausted, I'm dealing with grief, I'm tired, I just landed my dream job. Like, we don't know what other people are experiencing. So we have to walk around with the intent of asking questions, seeking to understand, and assuming positive intent. In this conversation where Trevor Noah and Simon Sinek are unpacking niceness and kindness, Simon Sinek said something really powerful. He said giving someone hard feedback is not nice. He said no feedback at all might feel nice in the moment, but it's not. That really hit me, friend, because it made me ask, how many times do we confuse silence with compassion? I think back to that leader that I was working with earlier, and she thought she was operating with compassion by avoiding, right? Because we're wired to not deal with discomfort. But the reality is she caused more frustration. Simon Sinek asked Trevor Noah to give him an example of what he mean by that, and I think Trevor gave the most human example that's out there. Trevor said, if someone has something on their face and you don't tell them, that's nice, right? I think about how many people go to eat at a restaurant and they get things in their teeth, like the piece of black pepper, you know what I'm talking about, it just stays there, and we don't tell them. We're like, well, that's nice because I'm not going to spare them the discomfort. I don't want to have an awkward moment. I don't have to tell them. But the reality, that's not being kind. Being kind says, I'm going to tell them respectfully, quietly, directly, however I need to communicate with them, I'm going to tell them, because kindness is about the other person's well-being, not about your comfort. And I think that's what we get confused with, this niceness and this kindness. And this distinction matters more than ever. We are living in a culture where avoidance is celebrated, right? Where good vibes only becomes as a way to ignore the hard truths, and when people would rather to be liked than helpful. And there's a lot of science that backs this up. Our brains are wired to avoid discomfort, just like that leader did at that team meeting at the beginning of the show. The nervous system seeks safety. It seeks predictability, and it seeks ease. And just like I gave that example with the assumed profanity, but really we were communicating fork, we fill in the white noise to predict the safety, to give ourselves ease, to allow ourselves to calm down. Niceness feels safe, but sometimes we don't have all the information, so kindness encourages us to walk in discomfort. Kindness asks us to tolerate tension, to sit in uncertainty, and to have courageous, bold conversation. Here's the paradox of it all. The very discomfort we avoid is the very thing that creates trust, creates belonging, and creates growth on the other side. So the very things that we crave as human beings, connection, belonging, trust, are all created when we choose to walk through kindness and make the choice over niceness, to be in the discomfort, to be in that moment, to have the courageous conversation. Because when we do, We're building another form of psychological safety. We are wired as humans to want to be safe. And we do that by being seen, heard, valued, and respected. When we walk in those moments of discomfort, we are giving our bodies more oxytocin, more of the feel-good chemicals. When our bodies are literally telling us no and we say yes, or our bodies are telling us to walk in discomfort and we choose comfort, we're pumping cortisol into our body at higher rates. When we choose kindness, and I know you're thinking, what in the world? Why would I want to put myself into discomfort? That's going to pump in cortisol. It does temporarily, and some cortisol is good for our body, but oxytocin makes us feel better, and that's what comes on the other side. Because oftentimes the individual have empathy. If the person does not receive what you're communicating to them, when you communicate in I statements, right? Not you statements. When you communicate in I statements and they don't hear you, that's not on you. That is on them. You are choosing kindness. And I think this is the piece that we have to remember. Is that it's hard because we don't know how the other person's going to respond, and we can create 152 stories in our brain so that we can keep ourselves safe. But if we avoid the conversation altogether, sure, you might feel calm for a couple of minutes, and it might be even a couple of days until the next thing triggers you or the next thing happens, which is going to create anxiety. And we are living in a society that has the highest rates of anxiety and depression than ever before. So here's the deal. When we choose courage, we choose care, we choose kindness, it rewires trust. And I know it makes it sound simple that kindness is this really simple thing. Cool, I'm choosing kindness. That's what I'm going to do. But it's really complex. It's simple in the idea that we act in ways that support another person's growth, we support another person's dignity, we support another person's well-being, but we are a person too, so don't forget that. But it's complex in the sense it is messy. We are human beings. Human beings are messy. Kindness isn't always soft, but it isn't always warm either. It doesn't always feel good in the moment, right? It's sometimes those moments that we have to make hard decisions that we don't see the immediate results. We don't get the immediate accolades, but we benefit, we see them years later. Sometimes kindness sounds like, I care about you too much not to say something, right? We all might have an experience that when I said that line and you heard that, you thought of someone immediately, even myself included. I care about you too much not to say this. So sometimes kindness looks like boundaries, but sometimes it also looks like accountability. And sometimes it's telling the truth when silence would be easier. The deal is how we communicate the truth. It's how we communicate the accountability. It's the way we communicate boundaries. And it's with intention and I statements and communicating about you yourself, I, and being clear, right? When we don't have the information, we make assumptions. If you don't communicate these things, people will make assumptions. This really reshaped the way I saw my work as a leader and as an educator, because I watched systems be nice to people while quietly letting them fail. I was in meetings where people were going to say, I want to talk to so-and-so, but I'm so nervous that this might happen, right? Or I'm so scared this might happen. I've literally seen the executive team avoid hard conversations in the name of harmony, in the space that they need someone or something, right? That only creates confusion and it creates really high resentment. And I have seen this happen in so many spaces. And here's the deal. You have to put it in simplistic terms. Niceness keeps things calm. So when I look at it from that way, absolutely, we kept things calm in that way. But it also caused chaos and confusion externally from that meeting. So kindness would have made things better. And improvement always requires a moment of discomfort. And on the last episode, I talked about the 1% advantage, being 1% better today than you were yesterday, and 1% better tomorrow than you were today, and so forth until you do this all year long, right? So if we believe in this constant state of improvement, then that's going to require some discomfort. Feedback is not to hurt us, it's to help us grow if it's delivered with kindness. So we have to think about performance feedback. When we're giving individuals on our team, whether that be our family, our children, our colleagues, our subordinates, whatever that may look like, your team, when you're giving them feedback, be intentional, but be specific and be kind, right? I think it's really important. Sally sucked at her job, right? Well, what was great though? What were some areas of opportunity? What were some suggestions that you have to make? Be kind in your delivery and be clear, because that's where sustainable improvements come from. When we avoid the conversations collectively, right? I think about when there were hardships when we would lose a student and the transportation director would be shielded from the executive team. Or I think about when we would lose another student on a playground and the chief of operations would be yielded by the executive team. I think about all the dismantling of trust and the impact on relationships that had. When we avoid hard conversations, it really shifts the entire culture because trust is broken. People don't think things are happening because we don't have all the information. We fill it in with what we do have. The other thing we want to be mindful of in a workspace especially is this: we are family culture, right? Like we are family. That is only clear if actions speak louder than words. Words, it's fabulous to have "we are family" on the wall and that be your mission and vision. But if the actions and the energy don't align, then guess what? It makes people feel uncomfortable. And when kind leaders feel uncomfortable, it causes chaos because kindness without accountability isn't kindness, it's neglect. And when we operate with low or poor performance feedback, with avoided conversations, or this "we're family-like" culture, we are not providing accountability, we're not providing high expectations, and it's offering this form of neglect. And I know I shared a lot of examples about workspace, but I think about pushing even further. It's not unique to just a workspace. It could be a school. It could be a faith-based organization. It could be your own family with your partner or even your children, right? And from a brain perspective in regards to kindness, when we choose kindness, when we choose to walk in the discomfort, when we choose the hard, it activates connection, it activates trust, and it activates that long-term safety that we're looking for. But those benefits, as I just said, only come, friend, after the uncomfortable moment. Our brains confuse the short-term relief with our long-term health. We think avoiding that conversation, staying quiet, all those moments of anxiety are going to impact us later, but they don't. Niceness, which are all those things, avoidance, niceness gives us the short-term relief where kindness builds that long-term strength. This is why kindness works. This is why kind classrooms thrive. This is why kind relationships last. Not because they avoid hard moments, but because they move through those hard moments, they move through those moments of discomfort with care, right? And the biggest piece is, it's easy to have these conversations outward, but as we talked about in our last episode, we really have to start kindness inward with our self-awareness. So where are we self-avoiding? Where are there conversations or actions or things that we are doing that we are self-avoiding? Are there things that we're using to mask or cover up those moments of avoidance, right? Are we people-pleasing? Is it that true example in your life of saying, I want to say no, my bones are exhausted, but I say yes anyways? That's niceness. If you feel it in your bones and you feel it in your body that you don't want to do something, you don't feel aligned to whatever it is, and you say yes anyways, that is niceness, not kindness, and that is people-pleasing. But I'm going to tell you something. We have been conditioned as a society to people please, to say yes. And I applaud our younger generation, our Gen Z and our Gen Alpha brothers and sisters, because they stand to say boundaries are important and they help us understand and define what boundaries are. And I think one of the things that we have been taught, especially generations of my own and before me, is that we are to be seen and not heard. That was a lot of the language we heard growing up. And so that forced into conditioning of doing what we were told to do out of obedience and compliance. But now we've pushed children to be critical thinkers, and we get frustrated when they ask us questions that are in critical thought. And so we have to be intentional. And I talk about it all the time, that pause, that 3 second, 6 second, whatever, however many seconds you got, pause. But we have to ask ourselves, are the decisions we're about to make, are they people-pleasing? Are they nice? Or are they rooted in that moment of kindness and that moment of discomfort that maybe we're going to say no and I don't have to explain my answer. And if the person's upset, that's on them. Caveat, if you've planned something and canceled, that's different. But if they had asked you for an initial and you say no, right, that can change things. But we have to have boundaries and communicate those boundaries. They're not walls, they're guardrails for ourselves. The other piece is when we're looking internally, are we masking things, numbing things, so that we don't have to deal with the dark, dark skeletons of choosing kindness for ourselves, right, to work through things that were hardships? Or are we truly healing through those moments? Because as we talked about, boundaries are kindness, not only for it to communicate to other people, but even to yourself. And so all of these things, as we turn inwardly, if we look at things we're avoiding, if we're people pleasing, if we're numbing rather than healing ourselves, and we're not communicating boundaries for ourselves and with others, then guess what? All of this is going to manifest or show up in how we treat other people. And it could look like a bad attitude. It could look like negativity, but really it could be nervous system overload. It could be that you have not rested and chosen self-kindness for yourself, that you don't even know how to function or even how to move forward. So here's the question or reflection that I want to leave you with today. Where in your life specifically are you being nice when kindness is actually being called for? And is there a conversation that you've been avoiding? Is there feedback that you want to give someone that you've been holding back? Is there a boundary that you want to set, but you've been too fearful to set it? And remember, kindness does not mean coming in hot. It does not mean pouring kerosene and burning the place down. It does not mean harshness. It means operating with honesty and humanity, knowing that we all carry invisible backpacks, that we are all doing the best we can. And that might look differently for other people. So may we ask questions, assume positive intent, and may we seek to understand. Because if we're avoiding discomfort, are we really operating in kindness and choosing care, or are we choosing niceness? Kindness is not about everything going right, friend. It's about embracing what's not with courage, with care and intention. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to lean into the discomfort so someone else doesn't have to carry that discomfort alone. I really appreciate you spending time with me. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone you care about. And this week, choose one moment where you practice kindness instead of niceness and tell me about it. Tag me on social media at Dr. Chris Culver on all social media platforms. And make sure you like, comment, share, and engage with our platform here. Because without you, this isn't possible. Remember, if you can't find the light, be the light. And sometimes the light you're looking for is the one that you carry on the inside. I'll see you next time. Have an incredible day.
The Science of Kindness podcast is hosted by Dr. Chris Culver. Our executive producer is Jake Doberens. This podcast was created in conjunction with Theophany Media.